Astro project, blast of attack, pass your neck with the shit to leave a rapper and Rex from the back of a black Acura. Bullet ricocheted and it swayed and it passed through your pecs. The assassin wet. All y'all know y'all don't have to go. Sawed off shoddy, make you potty, probably call the law. Me no gangster, I'm no tough, got me child of the most high. I get on the mic and you go, bye-bye. Devil don't test me, I throw shrapnel where your chest be. Shooting our family down in the streets, fuck the police, they ain't marching for me. Pull up, not that Rari, I ain't bad yet. I pull up, out that 85% of mass at. I put this on God, bad black is so hard. Bitch, I'm going back to Harlem in my West African garb.
Despite the difficulties of communication in the forest states, emerged there not long after the rise of the Savannah states, it is very difficult to be sure when the three most important of these states, Ife, Benin, and Oyo, were founded, but they were clearly in existence well before the end of the 15th century when the Portuguese sailors first visited the kingdom of Benin. Ife, Benin, and Oyo share a common myth of origin, but the ruling dynasties of Oyo and Benin acknowledge Ife as the original home. Ife and Benin have become world famous for their strikingly beautiful bronzes. Oyo, while it never achieved the same stature as the other states in the field of art, was by the early 18th century probably the most powerful state of its day in the whole of West. My apologies. Please like the show, share the show, tell a friend to tell a friend. We are live. Let's go. The birth of the forest states before 1500 AD. The Ife myth of creation, according to the Yoruba myth of creation, Ife was the original home of man. Olorun, the supreme god of Yoruba, let his son Oduduwa down from a heaven on a chain carrying a 5-toed cockerel, a palm nut, and a handful of earth. The earth was scattered by Oduduwa over the water. It was then scratched by the 5-toed cockerel and became dry land in which the palm nut germinated to become a palm tree. This palm tree had 16 fronds, which represented the 16 crown rulers of Yoruba. This is only one version of the myth, which with many variations was accepted throughout Yoruba land as the explanation of how man was created. For the Yoruba, it was the equivalent of Genesis for the early Jews. While in each version of the original number of the crowned heads may vary, as indeed does the list of those who were the original crowned heads, nearly all Yoruba agree that Ife was the original home. Thus, although Ife had become a very small state by the 18th century, it has always retained its prestige as the original home of Yoruba, and its ruler, the Oni, is highly respected as the keeper of the ancient shrines of Yoruba. Whilst the Ife myth of creation asserts that its ruling dynasty is descended directly from Oduduwa as the son of God, other myths describe Oduduwa as the prince who arrived from the east. This has led to a great deal of discussion as to how the Ife dynasty really established itself. Ife traditions tell an indigenous group of inhabitants, the Igbo, against whom the Ife had to fight many battles. One such tradition is that of Morimi, an Ife woman who promised the Orisha god of a local stream that if she could learn the secret of the Igbo's power, she would make any sacrifice demanded of her. She then allowed herself to be captured by the Igbo on one of their attacks on Ife, in which, as usual, they were dressed in terrifying masks and raffia customs. The king of Igbo made Morimi his wife, and during the stay, Morimi learned that the Igbo attackers were really only humans dressed in raffia. She escaped back to Ife and taught the people to defend themselves by setting light to the raffia costumes of the Igbo with torches. The Ife no longer feared the Igbo, but Marimi, when she was called on to make her sacrifice, found to her horror that her only son was alone acceptable to the Orisha. She sacrificed him to the stream in which he had to be drowned. In Ife today, she is still revered as a national heroine, and each year the Ide festival is held in her honor. Now, what are we to make of the two myths about Oduduwa? One says he is the first man on earth. The other says he came from the east to Ife. And support for the idea of Ife were not the original inhabitants of Ife is given by the Morimi story. It would appear that the most satisfactory explanation is one that says there were in fact two different Oduduwas. The first Oduduwa of the Ife myth of the creation was the first ruler of the original inhabitants of Ife. The second Oduduwa was the leader of the people from the east who conquered the original inhabitants and after many struggles became their undisputed king. To make himself an impartial ruler of both the indigenous inhabitants as well as his own immigrant followers, he and his successors tried to identify themselves with the original ruling dynasty. This seems a reasonable explanation when we recall the discussion on how important it was for a ruler to be a ruler over all his people and not just one section. There are many examples in African history of conquering dynasties trying to identify themselves with the dynasties they replaced. What is clear is that the Igbo of Ife, while they play an important part in Ife myths, no longer exist as a separate group in the area today. They have been completely absorbed into the Ife community over centuries. Even if we accept the two versions of Oduduwa's myth, it is very difficult to fix a date for his conquest described in the second version. All we can say is that Ife has definitely existed by the 13th century AD. That there were inhabitants of this area long before that time is known from a recent excavation of a rock shelter in Iwa Eleru near Akuru. There are human skeletons some 10,000 years old discovered. The second version of Oduduwa's legend tells that during his reign, a number of princes left Ife to found new settlements. This may have been the result of a population pressure or may have been inspired by the same motives that brought Oduduwa and his followers to Ife in the first place. Anyhow, in Ife today, the place from which the princes dispersed is still remembered as Itajurwo, the place of conference, and is situated just outside the Oni's palace. Tradition has it that a number of princes were given crowns and told to found new kingdoms. The number of princes and the names of the kingdoms which they found varies from kingdom to kingdom in Yoruba land. As with the original creation myth, each Yoruba kingdom would like to assert that it is one of the original foundations. One of the princes to lead Ife was Oremiyan, who is variously described as the son or grandson of Oduduwa. He first left the Benin where he founded the present dynasty. Convinced that non-Beni could not rule the Benin, he married a Beni woman by whom he had a son. When his son Iweka was old enough, Oremiyan left him to rule Benin while he established a new kingdom at Oyo to the northeast. Oremiyan then, according to tradition, was at various times Princess of Ife, well remembered for his first fight against the Igbo, the Obo of Benin, and the Alafin of Oyo. He is even recorded in some traditions as an Oni of Ife, and the Oya themselves say he was buried in Ife. We know very little about Ife as a state. Even the character of its ruling dynasty is in dispute. The Ife version holds that present ruling dynasty is descended directly from Oduduwa at Oya, and it is insisted that Oremiyan, when he left Ife, placed the slave Adimu in charge of the royal shrines, and that the present Ife dynasty is descended from Odimu. We have only the slenderest documentary evidence of Ife before the 19th century. Durat Pacheco Pereira, a Portuguese visitor to Benin at the end of the 15th century seems to be describing the Oni of Ife when he talks of a great ruler who is considered among the Negroes as the Pope is among us. He says that the Oba of Benin acknowledged this ruler as his superior. Pereira, however, placed him as living to the east, not west of Benin. Again, de Barros, another Portuguese visitor, also described the king to the east of Benin, held in a great veneration as are the supreme pontiffs among us, and who was placed behind silk curtains like some sacred object. These references have been used to suggest that the myth of Ife origin from Benin may not represent actual facts. However, to this day, Benin kings acknowledge Ife as their original home. In Ife itself, there is a site called the Heaven of the Kings of Benin, where it appears they were given a token of burial on their death. Once again, the importance of being very careful with both oral tradition and documentary evidence must be emphasized. Of Ife itself, we know only what archaeological evidence can give us. The famous Ife bronzes and terracottas are a very high order of artistic and technological skill. They depict the ruling class which wore elaborate clothes and regalia. While none of the buildings of ancient Ife have survived, we do find pavements made from carefully laid pieces of broken pots. A recent survey of the walls of Ife showed them to have been extremely complex, fanning out like a spider's web from Afin, the palace, the original center of the town. Ife must have been an important center of trade since the bronze heads, of which 20 are known, are actually brass and contain little tin. Some are actually made of pure copper. Now, no copper is found in Nigeria or in its western and eastern neighbors. This means that copper must have been imported from the Sahara since these heads predate the arrival of the Europeans on the coast of the end of the 15th century. In Benin, which the Portuguese visited in 1487, bronzes whose methods of casting traditions was imported from Ife were already in existence. Frank Willett, the leading expert of the art of Ife, believes that Ife reached the height of its artistic achievements around the 13th and 14th centuries. Recent carbon dates will confirm this pre-European origin. What were the superb heads used for? The most likely explanation in that there are death masks of Onis of Ife or important people. In nearby Owo, to this day, when an important person dies, a death mask is carved as realistically as possible for his funeral.
Carter on the beat.